In this lesson, we will examine emergency and precautionary landings and the procedures to follow to minimize their hazard. During the progress of an emergency situation, if it becomes evident that it is desirable to abandon further flight, it should be achieved with the minimum risk to both crew and passengers. In any such event, type-specific procedures will be laid down in the operations manual. To begin with, we will define the terms. An emergency landing is other than a normal landing, where the intent is to preserve the structural integrity of the airframe while allowing a safe evacuation. It would be the kind of event for which a mayday would probably be declared. For example, an uncontrolled fire necessitates an immediate descent to land either on land or to ditch at sea. The time available is very short, a matter of minutes. The Swissair MD-11 accident off Halifax, Nova Scotia, and the Air France Concorde accident diverting to Le Bourget are appropriate examples of this low time factor. A precautionary landing, on the other hand, does not carry the same level of urgency as an emergency one. It is a landing where there is a suspicion that continued flight is inadvisable. This event would probably generate a pan-pan call rather than a mayday. Such an event may be a fire in the hold that has been extinguished, but the extent of the fire damage is not known. To continue, we will investigate ditching. During design, the ditching characteristics of the aeroplane will be explored fully, and final attitudes, speeds and configurations suggested that will give the best chance for the airframe to survive the experience. Statistically, ditching is mostly successful, with 88% of ditchings resulting in few, if any, injuries to crew or passengers. The obvious example is the US Airways A320, which, following a multiple bird strike, was successfully ditched into the Hudson River of New York City. The success of a ditching depends on the level of preparedness, while the success of survival depends on rapid rescue. This will only result from good communications, not only during the initial emergency, but also after the decision to ditch has been made. Ditching is the deliberate act of landing on water. It is not an uncontrolled impact, so the aeroplane must be flown to a controlled impact. Injuries to passengers and cabin crew will be limited by adopting a braced posture, while securely restrained and wearing a life jacket. It is also imperative that loose articles are stowed, seats correctly positioned, and access to emergency exits cleared. The cabin staff will supervise these actions. The flight crew will follow type-specific ditching checklists, which will probably encourage the pilot to land along the swell direction on the crest of the swell. However, if the surface wind is over 35 knots, wave height may well exceed 10 feet, and it may prove beneficial to land into wind. The severity of the impact increases with sea state. It is recommended to land the aeroplane at the lowest possible speed, with the gear up, and at an attitude such that the tail will impact first. The aeroplane should be lowered onto the water, not dropped through stalling. If the approach attitude and speed are both satisfactory, it is inevitable that there will be one or two minor skips before the main impact and settling. The main impact will probably cause a very high rotational pitch force that may dig the nose into the water, compounding the effect. Clearly, this will be enhanced as sea state increases. The main effect will be rapid deacceleration. Therefore, pre-landing preparation of the cabin should be to counter these effects. The aeroplane will come to rest very quickly, and, unless the airframe has been damaged catastrophically, it should float long enough for the crew and passengers to exit the cabin and board the dinghies. The FAA's Aeronautical Information Manual contains much good advice on ditching and is available online. If the nature of the emergency is such that diversion to an en route aerodrome is necessary, ATC should be informed of the decision to divert, the nature of the emergency, and any assistance that is required. It is normal that emergency communication procedures, Mayday or Pan-Pan, will be employed to initially alert ATC to this emergency situation. During the transit, there may be time for ATC to scramble fixed-wing search and rescue assets to escort the aeroplane in the emergency, or to raise the readiness level of assets on the ground. Instructions from ATC should be complied with regarding heights to fly, routing and communications. It must always be foremost in consideration that the situation could rapidly deteriorate, forcing emergency landing or ditching. It will be the responsibility of ATC to alert the ground emergency services, fire rescue, medical, and to pass necessary information to the commander of the aeroplane in emergency. In any emergency situation, fear amongst passengers is inevitable. However, the cause of this fear is ignorance, and the best way to overcome this is to brief the passengers and cabin crew fully about what has happened. Tell them what is being done about the situation, and what is likely to happen subsequently. If a decision is made to carry out an emergency landing, the time between advising the passengers that this will happen and the event itself should be used in preparing the cabin and the passengers. A continual stream of advice and instructions, information and practice will occupy the minds of the passengers. The authority of the commander and the appreciation of the implied skill level of the crew will be reinforced by PA messages from the flight deck. The visual presence of the flight attendants in the cabin until they have to take up their landing positions will reinforce the opinion that the situation is fully under control. Any procedure employed before an emergency landing must include a comprehensive brief to the passengers concerning the evacuation of the aeroplane after the event. The brief must stress the authority of the cabin crew. In a ditching situation, the correct fitting and use of life preservers must be restated. In the event of an emergency or precautionary landing, rapid evacuation of the aeroplane is essential to prevent loss of life. In any emergency, the possibility of fire cannot be ruled out. During the initial passenger brief, the position of emergency exits and the routes to be taken to them from individual seats must be explained. Successful evacuation of the aeroplane relies on firm control by the cabin crew, imposition of strict discipline, and the correct use of the equipment. Drills and crew training are the responsibility of the operator, and such procedures, including preparation for the evacuation, will be detailed in the operations manual. In order to ensure a successful evacuation after landing, the crew will action the evacuation checklist, which will ensure that the engines and systems are shut down once the aeroplane has been brought to a halt, followed by the order to evacuate. The Saudi TriStar accident at Riyadh provides a salutary lesson in what may happen if the engines and systems are not shut down. The TriStar was still being pressurized by the running engines after it had been brought to a stop. Neither the cabin crew nor the emergency crews could open the doors. All aboard died of fire-related or crush injuries while trying to escape the smoke and flames. Type-specific evacuation procedures must be developed and promulgated in Part B of the Operations Manual. EASA mandates in its CS25 certification specifications for large aeroplanes the statutory requirements for emergency evacuation. The certification requires that each crew and passenger area must have emergency means to allow rapid evacuation with either the landing gear extended or retracted, considering the possibility of the aeroplane being on fire. In addition, the certification requires that for aeroplanes having a seating capacity of more than 44 passengers, it must be shown by demonstration that the maximum capacity, including required crew, can be evacuated from the aeroplane to the ground under simulated conditions within 90 seconds. The test criteria require the demonstration be conducted either in the dark or the dark of night simulated, and only half of the emergency exits are available for evacuation. In this lesson, we have studied the definition and implications of ditching, emergency and precautionary landings. We have looked at the EASA regulations and the commander and crew responsibilities if presented with any of these situations. Awareness and training are paramount if any of these situations are to be resolved successfully.